Hi there. Welcome to Pallet University. Today, we're going to be talking about the very first course that you set off on to take photos in New Pokemon Snap, the park on Florio Island. We've already talked about sort of the large-scale diversity, sort of between all of the islands and all the different courses in this video. So if you have not yet seen that video, make sure to go check that out. And I didn't really mention it by name in that video, but the park is one of the more diverse areas that they show us in New Pokemon Snap. Both the day and night version of the park are tied for 6th place overall for how diverse it is, which kind of makes sense for the type of environment that the park seems to represent. From what I can tell, this area seems most similar to sort of a plains or grassland environment, similar to some areas of the North American Great Plains. This is also pretty well supported just by how many Bouffalants you see throughout the course of this course. Which makes sense, because Bouffalant is very clearly based off of the American bison, and the American bison is emblematic of the North American Great Plains, at least how it used to be, not really so much these days, sadly. And what makes it really interesting is the addition of a river and a lake in this course as well, which increases the amount of diversity that an area like this could support. Around rivers and lakes, particularly in areas with drier climates like the Great Plains tend to have, exists what's called the riparian zone. The riparian zone is essentially the name that scientists give to the area of trees that border a river or stream in an area that wouldn't otherwise have enough sustained rainfall to support large trees. Trees need much more water than, say, grasses do. And so, in a plains type of environment, the only place where you would see trees in any significant amount would be along rivers in the riparian zone, because that provides the trees with the extra water. These trees can support more and different kinds of life than a grassland environment could just by itself, which is why we see some Pokemon like Heracross, which are found pretty much only associated with forests. In this course, we also see Bidoof, whose evolved form, Bibarel, is very obviously based off of a beaver. And I had always kind of thought of beavers as relatively northern, relatively cold temperature animals, but it turns out, looking at like a map of their native range, they live basically across the entire continent of North America, from like northern Mexico to northern Canada. So as long as there is water and trees for them to chop down and make their dams out of, they're pretty happy. After sort of looking through each Pokemon that you can find in this area, most of them made pretty good sense, with one exception, which is Tangrowth. Tangrowth was the only one that immediately sort of stuck out to me, because in my mind, Tangrowth just seems like much more of like a forest or jungle type Pokemon, not as much like a grassland savanna type. In fact, the only other time that I've really seen Tangrowth in the wild in a Pokemon game is in the Forest of Focus on the Isle of Armor. And while that's not like jungle, it is a relatively dense forest in a pretty warm climate area. It does not snow. There's not, a snow or hail weather that you can get on the Isle of Armor. So it's pretty warm temperature forest, which is what I just sort of inherently associated with Tangrowth, but that's actually not really true. After looking more into Tangela and Tangrowth, they're actually grassland Pokemon, as it turns out. The Fire Red and Leaf Green Pokedex actually has a neat function where it sort of categorizes Pokemon based on what sort of loose biome that they live in. Obviously, Tangrowth wasn't included in that because Fire Red and Leaf Green were Generation 3 games and Tangrowth is a Generation 4 Pokemon. But Tangela was, and much to my surprise, Tangela was listed as a grassland Pokemon. And when you actually sort of look at where you find Tangela throughout all the rest of the Pokemon games, it kind of makes sense. You find Tangela in the Safari Zone in Pokemon Yellow, as well as in Red and Blue, you find it on the route just south of Pallet Town. Generally not super foresty, tropical type areas, and then even in some very tropical areas, you don't find Tangrowth in other games. So There's some places where you do find it in foresty type environments and other places where you find it in more grassland type environments. Which kind of makes sense why you would find Tangrowth here, because it is grassland with some forest, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. Speaking of Tangela, where is it? In fact, where are any evolutions or pre-evolutions of most of the Pokemon in the park? The only Pokemon that have more than one member of their evolutionary line present in the park are Combee and Vespiquen, Swanna and Ducklet, and Eevee and Sylveon. And Eevee kind of counts because you can find Eevee on the Illumina spot part of the park, which is technically still included in the park, even though it's not on the main course. However, for the vast majority of Pokemon that you find in the park, they're the only member of their evolutionary line that you see. So, why is that? For example, in the nighttime version of the course, there are Torterra everywhere, but you never see Turtwig or Grottle. You know, where are they? We see Florges at the end in the big sort of field of flowers, which to me would seem like a really great place for Flabebe or Floette to live as well, but you just don't see them. And honestly, the most likely answer is that the developers didn't want to take the time to put in all of those extra Pokemon. For the night version of the course alone, it would take the number of Pokemon in the park from 21 to 40 if every member of all of those evolutionary lines were programmed into the game. And so obviously, that is pretty much double the amount of Pokemon in the course, which probably, presumably, would have taken about double the amount of time for them to make all of the models, program all of the interactions, and everything else. So realistically, that's probably the reason. However, sometimes the most realistic answer is not fun. So we're gonna move past that. There may be some sort of a real ecological answer for this, but it only kind of works for some of the Pokemon present. For two particular families, the Caterpie line and the Wurmple line, they have members on two different islands. Wurmple and Caterpie are found in the park. Meanwhile, Metapod and Beautifly are found in the Fount Jungle on Belusava Island. Because these Pokemon can't fly at some point in their life cycle, I would suspect that maybe the adult forms fly from the jungle to the park to lay their eggs, and then go back to the jungle. I think that explanation works fairly well for at least Wurmple, but doesn't really work for Caterpie, since if there are Metapod in the jungle, presumably there must be Caterpie there as well to turn into the Metapod, but I'm not really sure. But either way, that doesn't really explain why we don't see Butterfree anywhere in the game, because presumably if there are Caterpie and Metapod, that there would be Butterfree. As well as, all of these islands have Vivillon, so there must be some kind of food for a large butterfly-esque Pokemon to eat. So it's got to be some kind of good environment for that general form of Pokemon, so I would expect Butterfree should be there somewhere. Hopefully if they add like a DLC to the game or something, they add Butterfree, because otherwise that just really bothers me personally. And from what I can tell, there's only one other family of Pokemon that has a member on multiple islands, with the exception of Vivillon, which they definitely just do to put every Vivillon pattern in the game. But other than the bugs, there's only one other family, and they're going to get their own video because that's really neat and I want to talk about them. But sort of beyond all of that, the only other odd thing that I kind of noticed about the park's ecosystem was that it didn't really have sort of a large predator. You have large prey items, but not really too many large predators. At some point in the park, you see Tailo fighting with Wurmple, presumably to try and eat it. And then at another point, you literally see a Pidgeot come and swoop down and carry off a Magikarp, presumably also to eat it. But there's nothing to say eat some of the bigger things that live in the park's ecosystem, so that doesn't really make too much sense to me. Sylveon's kind of based off of a fox, just based on the whole Eevee line being vaguely fox-like. So that would be sort of a small to medium-sized predator, but no large sort of apex predator. Even though apex predator is not really a term that scientists actually use, that's definitely more of a media thing, but there's no apex predator in this ecosystem. However, according to the Pokédex, Tangrowth apparently is a predator. Which was news to me, especially since considering there's literally a scannable item on the park's course that talks about Tangrowth's favorite fruit. So I don't really know what to make of that. At one point you see Tangrowth sitting underneath the plant that has that fruit, but Tangrowth is the only thing in this environment that could even approximate a large-scale predator, so that's the only weird thing that I really noticed about this environment, but otherwise it seemed pretty typical of a sort of riparian, sort of plains ecosystem. Let me know your thoughts about all of this stuff that I've talked about here, and let me know which course you'd like to see me cover next. I'd love to take your suggestions and maybe some other weird ecosystem interactions that you've noticed throughout playing the game. Make sure to follow us as well on Twitter at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science, as well as, if you feel like this content's worthy of supporting financially, we do have a Patreon, link to which you can find down below in the description. A massive... Which is bigger between Tangrowth and Torterra? Probably Tangrowth, like size-wise. Torterra's probably heavier. I don't know. A large grass-type Pokemon size. Thank you to our patrons, Patty Murphy, Sam McCarty, and our newest patron, Jameer Connolly. I appreciate all of your support so much. And lastly, thank you so much just for watching this video, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.